Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about the latest episode of Star Wars Andor. But before we get into that, I want to let everyone know about my Teespring store. You can go there and get channel merch, which includes shirts with the channel logo on them, as well as t-shirts with other designs. And anything you get there, of course, helps support the channel. I'd also like to ask you to please give the video a like. It really helps. And of course, subscribing would also be helpful. And I think the coolest thing you could do would be to leave a comment, because I like to interact with the people that leave the comments. We have good conversations, and that, of course, also helps the channel. With that out of the way, let's get on with the review of the episode. It was called Announcement. And as it starts, we find Mr. B in his bonnet at home with Ma, prepping for a job interview or his first day on the job. I wasn't clear on which, but he's got a new gig thanks to the favor she called in. Of course, he's having his cereal with blue milk. And the whole time his mom is busting his chops. But they also end up watching a news report about the heist. Elsewhere, the Imperial suits, the evil officers in white, have a meeting, and a bunch of strict crackdowns are implemented at Palpatine's ordering. And the one lady officer person thinks that plays right into the rebels' hands. Mon Mothma meets with Luthen ahead of another meeting she'll be having later. And apparently, she didn't know about the heist. And she's disturbed that it occurred because she knows the Empire will overreact, and is further disturbed that Luthen apparently wanted them to overreact so as to gin up anti-Empire sentiment. Back with Mr. B in his bonnet, he tells his new employer that he plans to clear his name after wrongfully being fired. So I don't find his character all that interesting. I thought it served a purpose in the first 3 episodes and, helped get things going. But I'm not sure why they're keeping with him. I have to think that something's going to come of it, that, they're going somewhere with this character that isn't yet apparent. Because, the only other reason to keep including him is just a dumb narrative choice. And I don't think that's what's happening. So I think we have to keep thinking every time we see him that his story's going somewhere and something's going to come from the fact that they keep including him. So keep that in mind. We then see Vel all gussied up and meeting with another lady about how things stand post-heist. And she's told that Cassian is a liability who knows about Luthen and that he needs to be taken out, which is concerning. Or rather would be if we didn't know that he survives. But still, the thing about these shows and movies where we know they survives and there aren't any quote unquote stakes is that what we're seeing is how they survived everything that they went through. We're seeing what else they endured and survived in their lives before the events of the films or shows we've already seen that take place later in the timeline. So we don't have to really worry about whether or not there are any actual stakes. It's about seeing the journey and seeing everything they went through to get to the place where we already know they're going to get. So, yeah, so that'll be interesting, I think, because, is Vel going to really try to have him killed? Is she not going to? So on and so forth. I think that's all going to be interesting. Speaking of Cassian, he goes home to get his adoptive mom and disappear with her. But she seems worried he'll get caught while he's on Phoenix because everybody's looking for him. But she also seems to be keeping something from him. Next, we see Mon Mothma meet with an old friend at some kind of gala. And as she begins to tell him about her anti-Empire doings, ever so slowly to kind of feel him out while she's doing it, to not reveal too much before he catches on and doesn't like what he's hearing and moves against her. But she learns that he is also disenchanted with the Empire before asking him straight up for his help raising money. And we learn that her husband is indeed in the dark about the aforementioned anti-Empire doings of hers. So in the beginning, we've seen them kind of go back and forth and bicker a little bit. And he seems to know that she's kind of a maverick or a, a little bit of an obstructionist in the Senate, but he doesn't know apparently that she's out there fomenting and indeed sponsoring outright rebellion. And I wasn't sure how much he knew at the beginning, but now we know he doesn't know the whole story. She's actually keeping her anti-empire activities outside the Senate, to the extent that any of her Senate doings are anti-empire from him. So that's very interesting. Back on Fenix, we see Cassian visit Bix, and she tells him that people blame him for the Empire's presence there, and that he's likely to get turned in if he stays because everybody's mad at him. And he tells her he's leaving before giving her money to use to pay off his creditors there, and before telling her to tell Luthen to forget all about him. He goes back to see his mom, and she says she's not leaving with him because she's going to stay and oppose the Empire, having been inspired by the heist perpetrators, whom she doesn't know he is one of, as well as others who are now standing up to the Empire. And as she's talking, we learn that the name Clem that Cassian used with the heist crew was the name of someone that he and his mother both knew, who was hung by the Empire for, it would seem, openly expressing anti-Empire sentiment in public, which he didn't actually do. We see a flashback prior to this conversation with his mother, and it's not really clear what's happening. But Clem is there, and he says something to Cassian about, don't worry, the troopers won't be here long. And as a bunch of people in a nearby crowd throw stuff at the troopers or yell at them or whatever, he runs out into the street to tell them to knock it off because they're going to get shot. And when the troopers hear this or whatever, they stop and turn around and they see him there with the other people. And they apparently open fire. You don't see it, but the lead trooper says, prepare to fire. And I think what happened is they shot into the crowd. And while it would seem that Clem survived the shooting, they arrested him because they thought he was part of it, and he was convicted and hung. So that was interesting and very dark. Like, it just deepens the heaviness of this show. So I thought it was cool. Back in Coruscant, the Imperial suit who denied Imperial lady officer, whose name is apparently Miro, access to a report a few episodes back, accuses her of dangerously ignoring the rules and acquiring reports secretly, which she did. But she informs the boss, the old guy, of what she's figured out by doing so, about how the rebels are operating. And now, since this attack has been pulled off, instead of siding against her like he did before, telling her, oh, there's nothing going on, stay in your lane, he now realizes that she's probably right. And he rewards her by giving her the other guy's sector. But then privately, he tells her, good job, but watch your back. Next, we see Cassian again, and he's on a planet called Niamos, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in a city by the water, kind of looked like Atlantic City, on his way to a store after a hookup with someone who knows him as Keith, when he happens to witness someone running from the Imperials before finding himself detained by a shore trooper who suspects him of being involved in whatever was just happening in that spot, and who, with the assistance of a law enforcement droid, seemingly bent on strangling Cassini, arrests him, after which he's charged with trumped up crimes and sentenced to 6 years in jail, while being told that the sentence used to be 6 months before the new guidelines that were issued in the wake of the heist. And that's where the episode ends. Once again, I thought this was an excellent episode. I continue to think that this show is excellent. It's a show that seems to have divided fandom right down the middle. People either love it or think it's terrible and boring and awful for the most part. And one of the chief criticisms of the people who think it's awful is that it's not Star Wars. It's not like anything that Star Wars has ever been. And I can't say that I disagree with that sentiment. It's very different from everything Star Wars that we've seen before. If not for a few costume designs and some of the techno babble, it could be a sci-fi show of any other genre. It could be futuristic Earth. So they're not wrong. The thing is, I don't care. It's a super, super excellent show. The fact that it's set in the Star Wars universe isn't really doing anything for me. What's doing it for me is the quality of the story. I think the story is fantastic. I think the characters are fantastic. I think it's a great sort of dystopian drama about a society under the thumb of a non benevolent empire and their struggle to get out from under it, which I guess all of Star Wars is about. But this is a take on that genre that is very, to me, realistic. Gritty, the word gritty gets overused, so I don't want to use that word, but it's looking at it on a very down to earth level, on a very serious level, bordering on dark. And I just think it's excellent. It's just excellent. So I just hate when the episodes end. I think they're really great every week. I'm wondering what they're going to do with the Mr. Bean as Bonnet character. I mentioned before that I think they're going somewhere with him, and I'm wondering if they're not going to have him also develop anti-empire sentiment. He's already pissed off that he was fired, so he's already got bone to pick with them. So will he end up gravitating towards the rebellion? That's something I want to see. Now, I said in a previous review that I think the Lady Empire officer person, whose name I guess is Miro, her last name anyway, might also be someone who ends up sympathizing with the rebellion. And the reason I thought that and still kind of think that is because, like her boss said to her this week, watch your back. There's an adversarial nature within the ranks of the empire. And I have a feeling it's a possibility that she might decide that the empire is full of shit and side with the rebels, especially the more she doubles down on looking into what they're doing and finding out what they're planning and who's involved and comes to see all of that. There's a possibility that she may come to sympathize with them and side with them. But I could be totally wrong. We will only know in time, but I think that's a possibility. I'm more convinced that Mr. B and his bonnet is going to end up helping the rebels than I think she is, but I think there's a possibility they both will.
Or, and here's a thought that came to me during the editing process, what if it turns out that she's Cassini's sister? Because he started the show looking for his sister, right? And then in this episode, one of the things his adoptive mother says to him is, not only do you have to get out of here before you get caught, but you have to stop looking for your sister, because that's something else that could get him caught. So they're keeping the sister in the narrative, and at the same time they're showing this woman who's very anti-rebellion. So how cool would it be if she ends up being his sister and they have to go up against each other because they grew up differently and they're both at odds over how the right way to do things is, to be part of the empire and accept the empire or fight against it. That would be a killer plot twist. Of course, any of the other women we've seen could be his sister, Vel, the woman that Vel met with in this episode, but I think the cool twist would be if this Miro woman turns out to be his sister. But only time will tell if this is the case.
But yeah, that's really it. Again, another great episode. I can't wait to see the next episode. And I will, of course, be back to review it. I'm going to get out of here for now. Don't forget to visit the Teespring store. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment and to subscribe. All of that stuff helps the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.